mean that. Okay. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting of the Environmental Safety and Toxics Committee to order. And I understand that the word is out to the members who are not present, but we do have a quorum. So quick while we have a chance, let's call the roll.
Chesbro.
Here.
Miller.
Present.
Davis.
Present.
Fuhrer. Monty.
Here.
Ruskin. Smythe.
Quorum is present. Members, please review the consent agenda. There'll be one bill on the consent calendar, SB 143. We'll be taking the consent calendar up at the conclusion of the hearing. Let's begin with, do we have a sign-in order? Or Mr. Simidian's here. I know. I saw him in the audience. Okay, he's the only one present, so that's as good as a sign-in. Mr. Simidian. We have SB 317. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Let me begin by indicating that we are happy to take the committee's suggested amendments on page 2, item number 5 of the analysis that asks that other appropriate state agencies provide input on the labeling requirement of this bill. Members, this is a pretty narrowly crafted measure simply designed to enhance consumer notification regarding how you properly manage and dispose of fire alarms. I should mention this bill came to me from one of my constituents who happens to be a fire captain and said, well, he thinks obviously fire alarms are a lifesaver, that there are some issues with the appropriate disposal. The bill is designed to provide consumer clarity and better notification of where to dispose of the hazardous materials contained in ionizing fire alarms. I think some of you may know, but some of you will have no reason to know that there are two major types of fire alarms, ionizing and photoelectric. Both are important to detect different types of fires. But ionizing fire alarms contain a radioactive material, americium-241, which was discovered during the Manhattan Project and that emits alpha particles and low-energy gamma rays. The vast majority of these ionizing fire alarms are in homes, residential properties, with probably 17 million of them somewhere in residential settings in California. They account for about 90% of the fire detection systems in residential settings. At the end of their life, which is what we're talking about here, these fire alarms are mostly disposed of in the traditional waste stream, yet the U.S. EPA has recognized that consumers should protect themselves from americium in ionizing fire alarms by returning them to the manufacturer. Problem, of course, is that consumers don't have a lot of information or knowledge about that. Small bill, because it's not always clearly indicated how to properly manage these when it's time to toss. SB 317 simply recognizes the need to better inform the public of how they can recycle these potentially hazardous products with disclosure both on the product itself and in the packaging. I would respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Okay, do you have any witnesses in favor? Can bring the firefighter who suggested the bill over?
He is probably hard at work somewhere in my...
We're going to find fires.
So it's...
Okay, bill's been moved. Let me ask before, it's been moved and seconded. Let me ask before we proceed, is there any opposition? Anyone who's come testify against? Hearing none, can we please call the roll?
Chesbro.
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Miller.
No.
Miller, no. Davis.
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhrer. Monty.
Aye.
Monty, aye. Ruskin. Ruskin, aye. Smythe.
For one, that bill is out. Next, we will hear SB 486, medical waste.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This also came to me as a result of a constituent concern. Probably 1 in 12 households in California have at least one individual who is obliged to self-administer an injection to treat some medical condition. Could be diabetes, cancer, multiple sclerosis. There are a great many conditions that involve self-administered injections. That translates to roughly 1 million Californians who are injecting medications outside of a traditional healthcare facility, and that translates into an estimated 389 million sharps each year in the state of California that needs to be disposed of. What's the problem? The problem is that it's against the law. Under current law, it is against the law to simply throw those Sharps devices into trash or recycling containers. Many people, however, are unaware of the fact that it's against the law, continue to dispose of their Sharps, and even if they are aware of the fact that it's against the law, frankly, don't know what other options there might be, if any. That then poses a significant risk of injury and or infection to children, hotel workers, janitors, solid waste employees, as well as making, frankly, 1 million Californians probably in violation of the current law. This measure simply requires pharmaceutical manufacturers who sell medications that are routinely self-injected at home to submit a report to the Integrated Waste Management Board beginning July 1st of 2010 and annually thereafter on if and how they support and provide safe needle collection and disposal programs. Want to be very clear because this came out of our the Senate Policy Committee 7-0 on a bipartisan basis and on a 32-4 vote, again bipartisan out of the Senate. We're not requiring anybody to do anything that they are not doing today in the way of a program. We're simply requiring them to share with the Integrated Waste Management Board and to put up on their own websites what they do. If they don't do a darn thing, they can say, we don't do a darn thing. But the goal here, and I'm going to try and sound like my good Republican colleagues who supported this bill in the Senate, the goal here is to let the market work. The marketplace has power, but only if consumers are informed about what their choices are. So if this information is available online, and again, somebody wants to say we don't do anything, that's their privilege. Bill doesn't require them to do anything. But if this information is online, the hope is twofold. First, that consumers will then be able to make informed choices about acquiring medications that do, in fact, provide some sort of a take-back system or some sort of a system that keeps them from being in violation of state law. And second, that when you can compare and contrast right there in real time online, that there'll be some incentive for the folks who are not yet with the program to get with the program. That's all the bill does. And again, my hope is that we'll be able to harness the power of the marketplace. I do want to mention that we've been working with some of the stakeholders on this measure. I have agreed to take an amendment in the Appropriations Committee that will make it crystal clear that the bill is focused on those medicines that are intended to be injected at home. I think the bill is already pretty clear about that, but happy to work with the stakeholders and make that triply clear if that's what it takes to bring some consensus. And we're happy to do that in the Appropriations Committee if the bill gets out of committee today. I think the only other thing I might say at this point is that there's no penalty. The only requirement is to submit the report to the Waste Board and to post it. Puts forth guidelines as to what should be included in the report. But if you want to do a 50-page report, good for you. If you want to do one sentence, that's just fine. Just tell us what you are or aren't doing with respect to the management of Sharps that deliver your medication. That's it. With that, I would respectfully ask for an aye vote. As you can see, we do have witnesses.
Okay. Those have been moved and seconded. Let me call on witnesses in favor of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, pardon my back. My name is Ralph Sear, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the California chapters of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society and our 50,000 members in California. We support Senate Bill 486 because it will afford home Sharps consumers a better capability to comply with the regulations on Sharps waste disposal that were enacted in Senate Bill 1305. I have here with me an approved Sharps container, which I am required by law to dispose of in an approved hazardous waste facility. I'm fortunate in that I live in Alameda County, where we have 4 such facilities. I'm even more fortunate in the fact that I am mobile and can drive a car so that I can make the 20-mile round trip to the nearest facility, which happens to be in an industrial area next to the Alameda Canal and is not accessible by either bus or paratransit. And I can make those trips between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. on a Thursday, a Friday, or a Saturday. So you can see some of the issues here. I have MS, and I self-inject daily. The container I'm looking at here, or I'm showing you here, is designed to hold 98 syringes, 3 cc syringes. To give you a little bit of perspective, the Office of Senate Floor Analysis report on this bill cites 1 million home Sharps consumers in the state of California. And we collectively produce 389 million Sharps per year. I think it's reasonable that we can assume that not all of those Sharps will be properly disposed of. And Sharps waste is an issue for every Californian. Improperly disposed of Sharps damage the environment, and they pose a serious health risk. And Senate Bill 486 will require pharmaceutical manufacturers to actively address these issues. As you said, they don't have to necessarily do anything, but they have to at least look at it and think about it, what they want to do. And we urge you to pass this bill. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you for being with us and sharing your experiences. Next witness.
Hi, I'm Laura Sim. I'm chair of a group called the California Sharps Coalition. We're a group of volunteer advocates that advocate on behalf of home Sharps users like Ralph. And we advocate for safe needle disposal because a lot of our members have been pricked walking along the beach or taking out hotel trash. And so I just wanted to, show you guys what we're talking about here. These are the types of needles. Like Ralph said, public health risks result from the unsafe disposal of these needles. They end up in hotel rooms, they end up in public parks, they end up in recycling and solid waste facilities throughout the state. And we believe that SB 486 is a critical first step towards greater producer responsibility for these Sharps. Again, people who are typical at-home patients are people with diabetes, people with MS, people with allergies, but also hepatitis B, hepatitis C, more infectious diseases like HIV and AIDS. The language of the bill is simple. It's very straightforward. It requires pharmaceutical manufacturers that sell these medications to submit a plan. We believe that the pharmaceutical manufacturers are in a unique position to help educate their own customers about the serious risks of improper needle disposal, and we urge your support. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Justin Malone with the Alameda County Waste Management Authority. We're one of the authorities that does a pretty good job at this. We do believe the bill will help us do our job even better than we do it, and also the local environmental health folks that actually inspect these facilities very much in support. Thank you.
Okay, additional witnesses in favor?
Mr. Chairman and members, Dane Wadley on behalf of the League of California Cities. We're in support of the bill and echo the comments of the previous speakers. Thank you.
Josh Champion on behalf of Sierra Club California, and we support this bill.
Nicole Wertelman on behalf of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, also in support.
Kim Higgins, I'm a registered nurse and certified diabetes educator and have type 1 diabetes and with the Diabetes Coalition of California, and I support this bill.
Stuart Ferry with the California Neuro Alliance. On behalf of the 2.5 million Californians with neurological conditions, we support this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David Gonzalez on behalf of Ultimed. Ultimed is one of the manufacturers of the Sharps needles. We actually have a support, if amended, position. We think that the Senator's bill should go further and mandate that companies like ours actually provide the storage containers free of charge to the consumer. So,
amen. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for saying that.
Gene Urban on behalf of Waste Management, which also strongly supports the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, witnesses in opposition.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members. Paul Gladfelty representing Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers Association. First of all, with regard to our policy, we encourage all of our members to provide information to their patients regarding the safe and proper disposal of sharps. This bill, as currently drafted, talks about us supporting collection and destruction. We have a oppose unless amended, and we've provided amendments to Senator Simidian for his review. We were a little late in the process in getting those amendments, but nevertheless, we provided those amendments to him, and maybe he's still taking a look at them. But that was one of the provisions that we had. It talks about the manufacturer providing a plan regarding the collection and destruction, and ours was to encourage the proper disposal. I know it's a semantical difference, but we believe it's an important one. The other one is also to expand not just pharmaceutical manufacturers, because these are injectables, with medication in the sharps. There are a whole lot of other injection devices that are not related to a pharmaceutical company that are not covered by this bill, and we believe that they possibly should be included as well. So those were a couple of the provisions that we've offered. One last item I might add, and that is if we're supposed to provide a plan to the Integrated Waste Management Board, and presumably what we're doing is going to be effective with waste sharps in the waste stream, we've also offered another amendment that suggests that the waste collection people provide information regarding injuries that have occurred to the waste board, so we can see whether or not what we're doing is actually being effective. If it is being effective, then presumably injuries will have gone down and less waste. So those are amendments, just to let you know where we're at on the bill. Thank you.
Next witness.
Mr. Chairman and members, John Valencia representing Amylin Pharmaceuticals. We are not, as the analysis incorrectly reflects, in support of this measure. We sent the committee a letter yesterday identifying our position as opposed unless amended, and would hope that that would be corrected in the permanent record. That position is really an extension of the position we first communicated to Senator Simidian in April. In fact, it's virtually the same statement of position. We offered a series of clarifying amendments, frankly anticipating that we might be expected to comport with the requirements of the bill. We agree with Mr. Gonzalez. Frankly, if the bill is to be meaningful, the measure itself acknowledges all of the rest of the participants in the process. It says, for example, that our obligation would be to support retailers, pharmaceutical distributors, manufacturers of injection devices, and other partners, including local governments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a host of folks that are, with due respect to a prior witness, in as good, if not better, a position than we are, for one very good reason. We don't sell to whatever the layperson may regard as the customer. Your impressions of direct-to-consumer marketing notwithstanding, I apologize for my back. We sell to wholesalers, or we market to physicians and dispensers and providers, pharmacists perhaps. But we do not engage in any kind of relationship. In fact, it's against federal law for us to know who our end user, which is probably the more appropriate term for our products is, or are rather, excuse me. We made two other requests apropos of what Mr. Gladfelty was saying. The language of the bill actually makes us responsible for provision as opposed to the broader statements in the bill of support. And any way you read provision, that means you have to do something. So when you're responsible for providing for safe disposal and collection, we don't know what that means other than we have some obligation. We would have to report a frustration in meeting that obligation once we ferret out what that obligation is. So our letter speaks to a couple of fairly straightforward clarifying amendments, and our position is opposed unless amended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kevin Pedrati. I represent Sanofi Aventis, one of the larger manufacturing companies in the world. We have an opposed unless amended position on this bill as well. Most of our arguments are the same as Mr. Gladfelty made and Mr. Valencia, and we would just hope that somewhere down the road that the author works with us, expands the bill to include others that Paul and both John have explained, and look forward to that support. Thank you.
Tom Boyer. Apologies to those behind me. I'm with Novo Nordisk, Danish pharmaceuticals manufacturer. We make a lot of insulin and products for people with hemophilia and a number of other health conditions. I'd like to zero in my comments on 1 or 2 points at most. First, I've seen amendment language that's been drafted that would exclude drugs that are currently covered under Medicare Part B from the reporting requirements under this bill. That creates a pretty substantial inconsistency in reporting for a company like Novo Nordisk because insulin is covered under Medicare Part B for insulin pump users, whereas it's not covered under Medicare Part B for anybody else. So how are we supposed to properly inform and help people with diabetes when we've got these multiple different competing reporting requirements? It creates a real problem and a set of issues for us, especially when we're engaged in a number of safe needle disposal coalitions, including those that are including entities that are supporting this bill, who are well aware of the work that we've been doing across the country. Another issue for us.
Can I interrupt you for just a second, though, on a clarification? I don't believe we have such an amendment before us, and does the bill currently provide as he just described?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Your understanding is correct. That's not in the bill. I think the language that is being referenced, which again is not in the bill, is language that is being negotiated currently in an effort to respond to the very request from industry folks that we make sure it's clear that we're talking only about home use. That was one of the ways in which some folks had suggested that we could be triply clear, because as I said, I think it says home use pretty frequently in the very short bill. So that language is currently under negotiation, but it's not in the bill.
Thank you for clarifying.
And again, it's an effort to respond to the very kinds of concerns folks here have expressed about could we be clear about what we don't have to do.
Thanks for your clarification. You can proceed. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to
Absolutely. Apologies if I led anyone astray. And most importantly, we are fully supportive of the efforts of pharma. Completely agree with the remarks of those of us, my counterparts in the industry, and it's my hope to continue to work with members of the committee, members of the Senate, to come up with a bill that would work for everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other witnesses against? If not, I'd just like to comment myself that both from experiences within my own family and also constituents, I'm sure many of you have heard frustrations from constituents about problems with properly disposing of sharps. And by the way, you know, the products your clients produce are extremely important to the health and well-being of our constituents. So it's not as though sharp's a bad thing. But it's the problem we have is that we've identified that we don't want them in the garbage can, and we don't want them in the landfill, and we don't want people who are not properly equipped handling them. And so we have to have a way to deal with them, and people know that instinctively, I think. At least a lot of people do. I hope most people who use sharps do. But there's a lot of frustration about trying to figure out what to do about it. So my view of this bill is it's very, very modest in an attempt to move the responsibility concept along, not in any kind of heavy-handed market intervening kind of way. So I'm favorably inclined, and if I had a frustration with the bill, it would only be that we're not further along in figuring this out. But I think the modesty of the bill sort of reflects that we're in the process of trying to figure out what's the best way to make sure that programs are in place so people can properly dispose of these products. Other comments? Yes, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I'm inclined to support it, but I've got some questions and comments that maybe you can address, and it pertains to trying to figure out exactly the difference between what you're proposing and what is happening right now. In other words, there's already an education program put forth by the manufacturers on how to dispose of sharps. When you buy a sharp, there's a manual, there's a pamphlet that you can read on how to dispose it. It seems like all your bill will do is basically force them to cut and paste an existing plan that they may already have and send it to the printer and binder and send it off to Waste Management Board. I mean, how is it going to actually change the outcome of sharps that are being disposed in the areas that the chairman described, how does it actually going to change the behavior? Because I believe the educational material is already out there, and people that have testified today, I believe, pretty much abide by, existing disposal laws. And on top of that, law enforcement estimates there's, 5 to 6 million sharps picked up through illegal, drug use, through traffic stops and, criminal activity that are disposed and laying around and disposed in trash cans and all that. And how would it doesn't specifically address that, but to me that seems like that's a bigger problem because it's involves sharps being left around with people that are in conditions that are not normal because they're using drugs. So I'm inclined to support it. I don't know if I will continue, but that's kind of some of my concerns as it moves forward.
Let me see if I can strengthen your inclination, Assembly Member, if I may. First, I agree with the characterization of the chairman. It's a very modest bill, and the history on this is that former Senator Figueroa put a bill in the hopper a few years back that made it unlawful to simply toss these things into the waste stream. I have to tell you candidly, I hesitated at the time because my concern was that we were going to make lawbreakers of 1 million Californians absent some way to deal with this problem. It's one thing to tell people it's against the law. It's another thing to give them a real solution to the problem. But I supported it at the time because I was assured by folks in industry that eventually, they were going to get to a solution. So time has passed. The law is now effective. We still don't have a solution. So the question then is, what can you do to sort of give people a nudge to put programs in place that will actually help 1 million Californians? I agree with you, sir. The folks who are lawbreakers and who are drug users in the criminal sense of the term, they're not going to be affected by the bill. Although I should point out, the California Association of Narcotics Officers is listed as a supporter of the bill. They think, law enforcement thinks, the bill would be helpful. Just as I should point out that the California Association of Retailers thinks that the bill will be helpful, and they are they're not one of the other business groups that's on its support. But my notion was, what can we do to sort of move this along a little bit? I am mindful of the business climate right now. I am trying not to do anything that's going to be too burdensome or that's going to be applied too broadly. So the question, to your point, is, so what's the benefit, if any? And the answer is, there is no obligation for these folks to provide the stuff in the way of education materials, which they may or may not provide. And the reports I hear from these representatives is that different folks do greater and lesser jobs. Fair enough. The bill doesn't actually change that because they can put anything they want on the website. What the website does is allow you or your constituents as consumers to compare and contrast one to another and see what you might like to do in the way of comparison shopping if you had the opportunity to do that. That is the difference between something that may or may not be in a single package, which does not give you the opportunity to see, is there another better approach used by some other product that you might take advantage of. And the other thing I would say with respect to this notion of shouldn't it be applied more broadly, that's frequently a suggestion made by people who are hoping that they can add to the opposed list by getting you to include more folks on your bill. But I'll put that aside for a minute. The reason we've limited it to the manufacturers of the medication is because it's the medication that people want. I mean, they're not saying, gee, I want to go buy some sharps just to buy some sharps. They're saying, I want to buy the medication which is administered in this way. So the reason this situation exists is because of the underlying need for the medication, which is then distributed in that way. I think it's also important to distinguish between sharps, which none of us wants to get pricked by, but if you're talking about sharps where there is a medication that you could be pricked by or by blood from somebody who's used it, then you're talking about a level of risk which is different than the sharp product itself. And that's why there's the distinction between the medication being the sort of the source of the information rather than going the other route. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
Just real quick, you pointed out that the industry needs some sort of minimum standard on disposal so people can compare same information from manufacturer to manufacturer. Is there not a set a minimum set of standards in existing law that requires certain ways to dispose of them?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
And
the notion would be that if, with respect, Mr. Chairman, if the Chesbrough Company posts a notice saying, we don't do a darn thing and you're on your own, but the Davis Company posts something said, here's what we do to help facilitate the lawful and proper and safe disposal, then you and I as consumers could say, all due respect, we think we're not going to keep using the Chesbrough product. We think we're going to use the Davis product. And that, in my view, is the way, as I said earlier, we can help harness the marketplace.
I'm going to support it out of committee. I'm going to do a little more research, but thank you very much.
Well, I thank you for that.
We may have a new term in the legislative lexicon, a nudge bill.
That's
Mr. Davis.
I support the effort because I think as a matter of environmental safety and toxic materials that this is a policy issue that really does need some careful attention. And while many of our corporations hate regulation, this critical issue has devastating impact as we realize that one person's medication can be another person's poison when we think about accidentally being pricked. But having said that, I think that the industry has presented some serious concerns that help make a challenge for us to resolve in creating an acceptable piece of legislation. And I have the trust that the senator will begin to address those issues, such as the policy issue in the bifurcation of the Medi-Cal patients and the issue with regard to the lack of knowing where the end users are involved. And I believe overall, though, as a matter of public policy, that we will be better by working together to help create a public policy that California can hold as an example as to how we can better manage this problem. And it's not only a problem here, it's a problem all over the country. And so I support it because I have the faith that we can all work together, realizing the problems that the industry has. I think that the larger contribution is to have such a policy in place, and it does not compel you to a regulation that thwarts your growth and development in your industry. But what it does do behaviorally, and my colleague, Mr. Miller, stated
in the Senate, they order the sergeants to confiscate a cell phone that's going off in the hearing room. I'm sorry.
Seem to stop it right away, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. In summary, Mr. Miller raised the issue with regard to what will simply stating your policy on the internet or in some central place, what will it do? Well, over other areas of policy in the legislature, we have discovered, for example, in the area of diversity, we have discovered that corporations who list their vision for diversity happen to create an environment among their colleagues where we don't compel them to engage in diversity, but once they see competitors have embraced diversity, they have on their own began to do it. Environment shapes behavior, the basic principle of psychology. And so I think that that concept is at play here. While we cannot initially see the importance of this, I think after having implemented it for a year or two, that we will realize a gain in terms of California moving in a positive direction with this policy and it having a positive impact upon our citizens. So with that, thank you.
Other comments? Yes, Mr. Ruskin.
Very briefly, I echo Senator Simitian's assertion that the bill that was passed by Senator Figueroa, I also had concerns at the time when I had the pleasure of chairing this committee that the bill was a well-intentioned bill, but would there be a way to carry out what it intended to do, and that we would need to return to the subject in case we couldn't. And so I want to commend Senator Simitian for doing just that. We have two alternatives. We can either undo that bill, which I think would be very short-sighted, or we can move in a positive direction, such as this bill intends us to do, to solve this issue. So I urge support of the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Committee, I think that concludes the committee members' comments or questions. Would you like to close?
I think in response to some of the issues that were raised and the questions raised by Assemblymember Miller and yourself as a demonstration of good faith, and I appreciate Assemblymember Davis's sort of willingness to extend a little trust. But let me make 3 commitments right now because I really do think this is something that affects folks up and down the state without regard to ideology, or it's a problem that needs a solution, and this is a small step in that direction, I think. If there is a concern that there is some sort of implicit requirement to provide a plan, which is one of the concerns I heard articulated by industry today, I am prepared to insert language that instead of saying that they'd have to submit a plan that describes how the manufacturer supports, let's change it to a plan that describes if and how the manufacturer supports. Seems to me that's pretty clear. If you don't do anything, you can just say, we don't do anything. So I'm happy to accommodate that request and make it crystal clear. There was a request that the word destruction be eliminated and that disposal be substituted as a semantic issue. I'm happy to accommodate that request, and we'll take that amendment as well in the next committee, the Appropriations Committee, if we're fortunate enough to leave here today with an aye vote. And then finally, on the issue of home use, I just want to acknowledge, heard that loud and clear. We will continue to navigate how we can specify what kinds of medications we're talking about so that it's clear we're only talking about home use, but without getting crosswise with the reference point so that it causes other unintended problems. My commitment to you that we'll work on all 3 of those issues as the bill moves forward. And again, I appreciate your time and respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Okay. Just to clarify, those are not amendments that are before us. Those are just commitments that you are making on the record to take at the next committee. I want to note that there was discussion of amendments by the witnesses in opposition, but those were not submitted to the committee and weren't considered in the analysis, not because we wouldn't have considered them, but we just didn't have them. And note that the author is continuing to work with the industry, and that's a good thing. And I'd like to ask to be added as a co-author when you do those amendments. With that being said, my recommendation is a due pass to appropriations. Is there a motion and a second to? We have one. Okay. Then please call the roll.
Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Miller?
Aye.
Miller, aye. Davis?
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhrer?
Aye.
Fuhrer, aye. Monty?
Aye.
Monty, aye. Reskin? Reskin, aye. Smythe?
That bill is out 6-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have one more measure.
EB 614.
I'm hopeful that this one will be a little bit quicker for you. Under existing law, the California Clean Coast Act sets requirements for discharges from certain vessels in marine waters of the state. This measure provides a definition for marine waters of the state, since the Act currently contains an inaccurate cross-reference for that term. Also extends certain sunset provisions relating to sewer discharges, since some federal approvals have not yet been granted, and it clarifies other provisions of the Act. There was an issue raised in the analysis about Section 72440. What I'd like to do is I need to confirm that any changes to that provision would not affect the federal request. If a change won't affect the federal request, then I'd be fine with striking the second provision, but that's an issue I'd like to stay in touch with your committee staff about as we move to appropriations. To my knowledge, there's no opposition, and I would respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Okay, it's been moved. And it's been moved and seconded. Let me clarify again, the amendment's not here, but you are going to be working with our staff to develop the amendment?
Yes, the issue here, Mr. Chairman, is, there may be no issue. Let me start there. But we just want to make sure, given the long haul that we've had on these issues and working with the federal government, that we don't unintentionally create a problem for ourselves with respect to the request that is being made of the feds. So if there's not a problem there, happy to take the amendment. If there is a problem there, then we would not be inclined to take the amendment, but we'd certainly work with your staff to make sure all parties came to the same conclusion.
Okay. I believe it's been moved and seconded. Do pass to appropriations. Please call the roll.
Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Miller? Aye. Miller, aye. Davis? Aye. Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Monty? Aye. Monty, aye. Reskin? Reskin, aye. Smythe? Smythe, aye.
That bill is out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Smidian. Senator Pavley, we have AB 757.
just looking around. I think I know everyone but Miss Assemblymember Miller.
That's all right.
It's okay? Thanks, Cameron. You're gone for 2 years from the Assembly, and the turnover is amazing.
We'll try going the other way.
2/3 of the
Yeah,
House.
I've had exactly the same experience. I thought I knew a lot of members of the Assembly. 1/3 were left.
Yep, that's about where I am. All right. But the decor is the same.
But I'm still here.
Yes, familiar. Senator Chesbro, I want to start out with saying that we'll be accepting in concept the amendment proposed by the committee staff to require that alternatives to lead in wheel weights are assessed to ensure that alternatives are no more toxic to human health and environment than current wheel weights that are made out of lead, looking at steel and some other options. But the final wording on that, if I might, will take in judiciary. We haven't had a chance to talk to our sponsors or the manufacturers that have been supportive of our bill, but I'm sure we can get there because I support in concept what you're doing.
Okay, that's good. I should let you go ahead and present, but I want to note that Mr. Ruskin had raised concerns, and we'll probably want to work with your staff on exactly what the standard of having it be, not as having it be an improvement.
Yeah, we know lead is bad.
Right.
So
right. But I'll
things
let
should
him
not
speak
be
for him. I'll let him speak for himself.
equivalent or worse than lead.
Sure.
Yes.
Why don't you go ahead and present?
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 757 seeks to ensure that lead, a metal that we all know is highly toxic, does not continue to contaminate our drinking water sources or the surrounding environment. And we're doing that by banning both the sale and the installation of lead wheel weights on cars and trucks. Actually, research shows that lead wheel weights falling off cars and trucks are a major and yet unregulated source of lead pollution in drinking water. In fact, in California alone, it's estimated that 500,000 pounds of lead fall on California roadways every year. And lead wheel weights are for balancing tires. If you haven't seen them, they're attached to the rim there. Lead wheel weights fall off and traffic runs over it, cars and especially trucks. The dust goes into the streams and reservoirs. It causes a real problem, and it's been noticed and identified by the U.S. EPA and the California Department of Public Health as primary drinking water and groundwater contaminant. Lead, as you know, is a major health problem with people, and this committee is well aware of that, so I won't go into all the health problems that lead causes, particularly in young children. The most important thing about this bill is in California this year, Chrysler and 3 leading wheel weight manufacturers have agreed to phased out leaded wheel weights as part of a landmark legal settlement approved by the Alameda Superior Court. This bill simply codifies that settlement. Specifically, Senate Bill 757 would prohibit the sale and installation of lead wheel weights that contain more than 0.1% lead by weight. By banning the sale of lead weights, we ensure that no other manufacturer produces or ships lead wheel weights in the state. And by banning the installation of lead weights, we ensure that no secondary parts distributor or installer uses lead wheel weights. I'd like to speak in support of Senate Bill 757, Angie Miller, who's with the Center for Environmental Health, and Andrea Ventura with Clean Water Action. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
First witness in favor.
Hi, my name is Andrea Ventura, and I am here today on behalf of Clean Water Action. We are a national organization with about 60,000 members here in California. We are committed to protecting our precious water resources and ensuring that everyone has access to clean, safe, and affordable water. We're also committed to stopping pollution at its source. And we're very proud to be a co-sponsor on this bill and just want to expand on why we think it is important to pass this bill and why we need to pass it now. As you heard, wheel weights are a major source of lead onto our roads and ultimately into our waters. 65,000 tons of lead are in use over 200 million cars across the country. And as you just heard from the Senator, about 2,000 tons of these weights are lost on city streets, as vehicles hit curbs, etc. They are turned into powder by subsequent traffic and dispersed into our stormwaters and into our water resources. we estimate that based on the number of vehicles in the car, registered in the state and the number of miles that vehicles drive, about 500,000 pounds of lead weights are falling into our roads annually. You can see these things, by the way, on the road. We have a staff member who, in the last 2 weeks, just walking to work, has picked up 5 of them, some of them actually sitting on storm drains ready to go in. So a major problem, and what we're finding, the California Department of Transportation has found when they monitor runoff, stormwater runoff, that in general, the lead levels in that runoff far exceed the standards for drinking water as well as for surface water quality. So obviously a very major water issue. One of California's biggest challenges is how to ensure that we will have enough water to sustain a growing population now in the future. I'm sure you're all aware of that. The more pollution in our waters, the more usable resources dwindle. The continued rise of lead in our water not only is therefore an environmental problem and a threat to public health, but will be tremendously expensive as we depend more and more on water treatment, and while we must develop cleanup plans that cost our communities millions of dollars. I spend a great deal of my time as a water advocate on those issues. Very, very expensive. The bottom line is we cannot afford to allow this continued bleeding of lead into our waters on any level. SB 757, we believe, is common sense. We can stop a dangerous substance from entering the environment, replace it with readily preferable alternatives that are far less toxic or benign to the environment, and provide, as you heard, an even playing field on which good actor companies can compete. We also see this bill, by the way, as in keeping with the principles of the Green Chemistry Initiative, which is an effort that we have and will continue to be deeply involved in. For these reasons, we urge you to support Senator Pavley's bill. We also would remind you that this is a time-sensitive issue, as the terms of the settlement that she referred to start in January 2010, and we need to ensure that lead wheel weights manufactured offshore are not allowed to take hold in California before the Green Chemistry Initiative takes hold itself. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Next witness.
Thank you. My name is Ansha Miller, and I'm the Policy Director at Center for Environmental Health. I'm also the coordinator for the Change Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to support SB 757. The Center for Environmental Health is proud to be a sponsor of this important legislation. As both of the previous speakers have mentioned, lead is a stunningly toxic metal. Well known. There's a long list of problems that's been linked to lead exposure by the U.S. Public Health Service, including lowered intelligence, behavior problems, cancer, strokes, high blood pressure, kidney problems, anemia, cavities, and delayed puberty. And children are particularly susceptible to lead's toxic effects. So while this is a naturally occurring mineral, a lot of human activities really have contributed to its prevalence in the environment. Levels in our environment are about 1,000 times what they were a mere few hundred years ago. And a team of physicians from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine and the Harvard School of Public Health have estimated that the costs of lead poisoning in the United States are $43.5 billion a year. And lead wheel balancing weights are a significant source of environmental lead. Even though I never would have figured that before I started working on this issue, lead wheel weights, what's a lead wheel weight? I had no idea. And I think that's one of the things that speaks to the need for this bill. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, about 65,000 tons of lead wheel weights are in use on the over 200 million cars and trucks that are driven in the United States. About 2,000 tons of these wheel weights fall from vehicles every year and onto roadways. And then we extrapolated that figure into California and found that about 500,000 pounds of lead go into the waterways in California every year just from these lead wheel weights. California Department of Transportation monitors runoff from California highways for lead and has found that runoff water frequently exceeds drinking water standards as well as surface water standards. Lead deposited on roadsides a lot of it is leaded gasoline, but they found that 2/3 of the total lead actually comes from these lead wheel weights. Better wheel balancing technology is available, but consumers have there isn't enough understanding about, like I said, what a wheel weight is, so there's no real demand for it. You go and you get your tires balanced. You have no idea what's involved in balancing a tire. It's really putting these wheel weights on. So consumers don't know to even ask for lead-free wheel weights. That's why it's really important that the government steps up and takes regulatory action on this. The most common alternative products are made from zinc or steel. Steel wheel weights are preferred because they can be easily and economically recycled with the other steel components of the automobiles. Zinc, however, needs to be separated from steel components in order to be recycled. Also, zinc is toxic to aquatic life. And while no technology is absolutely neutral in terms of its environmental impact, neither steel nor zinc has the potent toxicity of lead does. Unfortunately, right now, steel wheel weights are more expensive than lead wheel weights just by a little bit. An important reason for this additional cost is that manufacturers have only recently invested in the equipment to produce lead-free wheel weights. But as the demand for steel weights increases, economies of scale mean that price differential will also decrease. All major U.S. car manufacturers are currently using alternatives to lead wheel weights. And as a result of an agreement with the Center for Environmental Health, the two largest wheel weight manufacturers in the United States have agreed to end the sale of lead wheel weights in California at the end of 2009. The U.S. EPA's voluntary national lead-free wheel weight initiative gives wheel weight manufacturers and users the opportunity to publicly commit to ending the use of lead wheel weights by the end of 2011 to the greatest extent feasible. Major tire retailers, including Bridgestone, Firestone, Goodyear, Costco, and Walmart, have all joined that voluntary agreement. So what we need is to level the playing field here in California for our domestic manufacturers. CEH was the plaintiff in a litigation that led to agreements with the two largest wheel weight manufacturers for the California market to end the sale of lead wheel weights in the state.
I'm going to have to ask you to wind it up.
Wrap up? Okay. So the point is that this bill will close a loophole in the existing legal structure that puts our domestic manufacturers at a disadvantage. And the American wheel weight manufacturers have invested heavily in their ability to provide lead-free wheel weights and have completely retooled their businesses. And we need to make sure that we don't enable foreign manufacturers to come in to the market because it's hard to enforce against them.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other witnesses in favor?
Joshua Champion here for Sierra Club California, and we also support this bill.
Thank you.
Stephanie Hall with Planning and Conservation League, and we support this bill.
Thanks.
Justin Malone for the California League of Conservation Voters, in support. Thank you.
Omid Nasrati with the Environmental Working Group, in support of this bill. Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members, Tony Gonzalez representing the Association of International Auto Manufacturers. We don't have a formal support position on the bill. We do support the effort, and our member companies have been involved in the efforts that have been mentioned earlier in testimony. We do request, not today for adoption, but for consideration with the author and others, the chairman and the staff of the committee, an amendment that would make the operative date of the bill January 1st, 2011. The bill as currently drafted would take effect in 6 months, and our member companies have expressed a concern that they might not be able to fully comply with the bill 6 months from right now, but by January of 2011 should be able, we'll absolutely be able to be fully in compliance and in conformity with the other initiatives that have been discussed earlier in testimony today.
Okay. Thank you. Does the author have any response to that question of the implementation effective date?
We'd be glad to work with Mr. Gonzalez, but many car companies have joined this voluntary initiative already. General Motors and Ford and Chrysler, Toyota, Costco, Bridgestone, Firestone, and Walmart. I think what we're talking about is the Chrysler settlement with the wheel weight manufacturers goes into effect January 1st of 2010. that's next. In the meantime, there's some importance here to start leveling the playing field, because what you'll see is the aftermarket auto supply stores fill in with imports from China, and there's particular concern that we open the door for additional lead weights. We're moving in the right direction. Everyone's said they can voluntarily comply. So I think that date is relevant, but I look forward. I have a good relationship with Mr. Gonzalez of continuing that discussion.
Okay, any witnesses in opposition? Okay, let me open here with a few comments. In anticipation that this might come up, since we've had an ongoing conversation in this committee and on the floor about the implementation of green chemistry, let me say that, one, generally speaking, I think it's important to allow the green chemistry process to get underway, and we need to continue our oversight to try to make sure it's effective. On the other hand, certainly one obvious exception to that approach of allowing it to move forward is when something is a clear and present danger to public health and the environment, and that's been acknowledged by the courts, been acknowledged by manufacturers, and in fact there's a process underway. I do think we, in the amendments that are under consideration here, do want to link the two and not consider this completely separately from green chemistry. But I do think that just right up front, let me say, I think that justifies our discussing it in a legislative context. I also think it's important to ensure that alternatives to prohibited chemicals or products are appropriately assessed to reduce human and environmental exposure, and that was the source of the amendment proposal, to make sure that it is no more, the replacement's no more toxic. And I'll let Mr. Ruskin speak if he'd like to about his concerns with that, but I think it was a good point about that being maybe not a high enough standard, simply saying no more toxic. And then the other thing is it's important that the green chemistry alternatives analysis process that DTSC is developing be followed. That being said, there's some confusion about where the amendments are actually going to take place. I know we don't have them in their final wording here, but assuming the committee would agree with me, I would like for us to, I think we have a general concept of what they are, and allow the author to work them out with staff in the next 24 hours. The concept,
if I might paraphrase, is to make sure that whatever substitute, we know lead is bad, and there's no dueling sciences on whether lead is good or bad. Right. We know it's something we want out of our water. So the concept that, if I understand it, is the alternative products, whether they're steel or zinc or whatever, need to be less toxic than lead. This is dual referred to judiciary, Senator Chesbro. So there is this window of opportunity to have this discussion.
I'm sorry, I was in two conversations.
Dual referred to judiciary.
Right.
So that final wording on, if I get the concept, and I've read your staff's analysis
They're
here,
proposing
or suggested amendments that alternatives to lead in wheel weights are assessed to ensure that alternatives are no more toxic to human health and the environment than current wheel weights, is what I had read. But I think what you're talking about is having it less toxic.
Well, the staff, I believe, circulated something in response to Mr. Ruskin's concerns that they referred to an alternatives analysis, and so would go a little further than just simply saying it was no more toxic.
Well, let's work out that final language with your staff.
Mr. Ruskin.
Yeah, I think you've covered it. My concern was simply that having an amendment that would assure that nothing was more toxic than lead
mercury
that doesn't take us takes us back to before the court ruling. So my hope is that it'll be a significant improvement upon lead that will be the standard.
Right.
Thank you.
We want to ban lead, but we want to make sure the alternative is much better. That steel as an alternative is recyclable, and that seems to be perhaps the direction that most are going.
Mr. Monning.
Well, I think the spirit has been captured. I don't know that this is the place to discuss the specifics of the amendment, but if there are materials that are non-toxic,
obviously that would be
the ideal.
Yeah.
But again, just
there doesn't seem to be anything available, but in the future, hopefully there is.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess what I'm seeking here it would be a due pass as amended, not having the exact wording completely pinned down, but trust that we have an understanding of what it is we're trying to get here, and also give Ms. Pavley the opportunity to get any feedback in the next 24 hours. I think that was one of the concerns as well.
Is the time too? Yeah, I know my staff, we just saw it this morning.
Sure.
So it was going to work with the sponsor and the manufacturers
Sure.
who were all supportive, who were moving in the right direction
Okay,
as well. Should
so
work fine.
that would be my request for a motion.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Is there any further questions or discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Miller? Miller, no. Davis?
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Fuhrer, aye. Monty?
Aye.
Monty, aye. Reskin? Reskin, aye. Smythe?
That bill is out 5-0, and thank you for your work on this issue.
Thank you.
5-1, I'm sorry. I apologize. 5-1. Finally, we have consent, which has one bill, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hearing, SB 143, Cedillo Brownfields. Consent calendar has been moved and seconded. Please call the roll.
Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Miller?
Aye.
Miller, aye. Davis?
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Fuhrer, aye. Monty?
Aye.
Monty, aye. Reskin? Reskin, aye. Smythe? Smythe, aye.
Okay, that concludes our business for the day. I think everything's passed out, so we could just allow members to come over here and add on. So